David started in independent features, industrial work and other things like we all do. In the early 90s, he was doing lots of independent feature films, 33 films now, 33 feature films, as well as TV series work. David shot the first HD, all digital feature film to be released in the United States, Jackpot, in 99.
Actually, it was released in 2000, I think, or 2001. It was the first F900.
First F900 feature
to be released.
Yes. And he also and came to note for some really gorgeous photography on features such as Twin Falls, Idaho, and North Fork, and features that, of course, David's here to talk about lighting today, but there's lots of great ways to manipulate our medium. And one of my favorite little stories was in North Fork, wanted to desaturate the image, and so having ketchup bottles full of gray liquid, things like that, just to help create a sense of look and tone to the space. And he's done lots of work in not only doing his own work, but in reaching out to the community and the populace, which is why we're so happy to have him here today, because that so much of what we want to do at AbelCine and is to reach out to the community. Part of the reason that David is a member of the ASC is not only because he does such excellent work as a cinematographer, but also because he does believe in education and sharing with the community, working on cinematography books, working in the internet, and doing seminars and other such great work. Currently, David is shooting on the series Smash on NBC, and we're really happy that he was willing to take his day off to after a very late night shooting to come and join us here today. So, thank you, David Mullen, ASC.
Hi. So I was asked to come in and talk about lighting. It's not going to be as technical as the previous talkers have been. Maybe that's a relief, or maybe not. But what I did want to sort of center most of my talk on recreating certain daylight effects on stages and whatnot, because that does have, the newer technologies are having an impact in the ease of doing that. But I also will talk about more traditional lighting effects and instruments and stuff, because I still mainly use those. So it's not going to be specifically just centered on the newest technology. Right now on Smash in particular, probably the most high-tech lighting I use is actually what my lighting designer, Don Holder, who does the big musical numbers, he's a Broadway lighting designer. So he brings in a lot of, high-end concert lighting stuff that I have to photograph. But on what I do mainly on Smash is traditional narrative drama. Occasionally I get to do a musical number that's more of a fantasy-based number, and it doesn't involve hundreds of stage lights and stuff. But anytime we have a huge production number on Smash, it's a Broadway lighting crew that comes in and sets it up for us. And I'm mostly there to photograph it and make it work in close-ups and other things for the camera. So in the theme of talking about how technology is changing how we approach things, I was going to talk a little about my work starting with Big Love, which was, I did a season of Big Love in 2006, the second season. And Big Love presented a unique challenge in that it has a backyard set that was supposed to be outdoors, but it was shot on a soundstage, which is unusual for a television series to create such a huge day interior inside a stage, or a day exterior inside a stage. But the reason was that story-wise, the Bill Paxton's character has 3 wives, he owns 3 houses, and they all share a common backyard. And to find that on location was not only difficult, but then to control that with children and other things, it just had to be, for a television schedule, had to be shot inside just to have the control over the time of day and other things. But the first season, I didn't shoot, and when I was hired, the producers wanted me to look at how the backyard was lit and to make it a little more believable as being day exterior. And there was nothing particularly wrong with how it had been done the season before, but it was just subtle things of contrast and other things trying to maintain a believable look under a soundstage. So the first slide, how do I just
Space
click?
bar. There you go.
And then you'll hit the arrow up and down
You can
keys?
just keep hitting space bar.
Okay. So I took this photo. This is early on in this season of Big Love, where I came in. We had this big backyard set. The set had already been set up by the previous year's cinematographer. It has 250 space lights hanging over the backyard. It's got a dino on a lift at each end of the backyard, and it's got a giant, huge cyc that runs around half the backyard, a giant curved cyc. So it's a big box, basically, in a warehouse. We also had rolling towers when I needed the sun to be coming from some other direction than the two ends of the stage. But I had limits on the height of the stage, which I found over time. It gives the effect that it's always late afternoon in the backyard. The sun's never higher than just coming over the top of the house. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot about a TV series is often when they light these big stages for day and night, they tend to have just two looks, which is day and night. And it was important to me to find ways to create a time of day change so that I'd have sunset scenes, twilight scenes, inside and outside the house. Now, we shot on film on Big Love, and under all these lights on 500 ASA film, I generally got 4, 5, 6 split, roughly, which seemed like plenty of light. But the problem is, as soon as we went inside the houses, the exterior had to look overexposed to be believable. And since we're shooting on zoom lenses, which were 2.8, it essentially meant that the backyard view was never more than a stop and a half overexposed if I turned on every light I had. So I tried to find ways when I was inside to boost up the level of the view out. You know, if there was just a bush or a tree out a window, I'd pound it with dinos or power cans, anything to overexpose it on film. It would have been easier in some ways on digital to make it look hot. But film just has such a wide overexposure latitude. The space lights are tungsten, but every 6th space light had been gelled, I think, half blue to shift the color temperature of the backyard a little bit to the cold side. For my taste, it was not enough. They should have gelled perhaps every 3 space lights, half blue. I also wanted them to wire the board up so that when I wanted to, I could just switch on only the blue ones, but when I came in, it hadn't been wired that way. So I had a hard time hunting and finding which space light I wanted to kill or whatnot. But generally, we could do it's a 6K space light, I think, and we could go half speed where we could just had half the bulbs on, or we could dim them. And one of the things you find about lighting stages for television is that they still generally are lit tungsten through a dimmer board. And the main reason for tungsten is just that they have to rent these units over many months. They're trying to save money, and they have to rent a lot of lights, and they have to run them to a dimmer board just for ease of shooting. There are dimmable now, non-tungsten lights, as you've seen in these lectures. And I asked an executive on my current series, well, why don't we use all kind of green, modern lights? And he says, well, they're too expensive to rent for 8 or 9 months. And I said, yeah, but the savings in electricity would more than pay for the rental cost of the lights. And he said, yeah, the trouble is we don't pay for the electricity. We make a flat rate with the stages, and they pay for the electricity. So it's a classic problem of the savings doesn't help them. It only would help the stage owner. But I suspect I'm sure it's different on the stages where the networks are shooting on their own stages, like in LA, where there's a lot more concern about power consumption. I've been on shows where the line producer will run around and switch off lights in between takes, trying to save on electricity. But where we're shooting, it's not that case. But I suspect over time, the deals that stage owners make with the studios for rental will have to include an actual price for the true amount of electricity they're using, in which case people are going to be a lot more concerned. Television stations, other type of places that actually pay for the electricity have all been switching over to these new types of lights because of the tremendous cost savings. And not just cost savings, but obviously heat savings. That much tungsten light is just tremendous amount of heat. You have to run a lot of air conditioning to keep a stage like this cold. So one of the things, we're filming out in Santa Clarita outside of LA, and the way I got the backyard to look more realistic was I'd step outside every day and check my meter, and I'd read the difference between the key and the fill, and I'd come back inside and I'd say, well, all these space lights have to be 4 stops or 3 stops down from whatever the sunlight effect I'm using is, and I would try to balance that way, and I'd try to stop. Sometimes the gaffer would tell me, hey, the back side of this house is dark. Do you want me to throw a 5K on it? And I go, no, because if we were outside, it would be dark, so don't fix it. That's the trouble with faking inside-outside, is a tendency to overlight, because you can fix everything, you tend to do it. And my attitude was much more like, let things fall off, let things burn out. Don't try to make it perfect, because the more perfect you make it, the less believable it is. The other thing that helped a lot was things like E-fans running behind trees, trying to get the branches to be moving. We also found it helped to shoot longer lenses where you would throw things out of focus more, although it's hard on a stage to back up enough sometimes. So dinos and space lights, often for late afternoon scenes, I'd have to put half O on all these dinos to warm them up. I never quite got a deep blue twilight look is what I wanted. I think I did it once with by turning on the blue space lights and then putting a blue filter on the camera. But when I was inside some of the rooms looking out on this backyard, I would actually go around staple gels to all the windows. And this is something I have a photo of, just show you. It's a small photo, but to show you the issue with that. So here's a typical backyard scene from season 2 where I just had the dinos over the top of the house, just doing a strong backlight. And then when I would fill in the faces, I try to treat it like I was outside. Rather than bringing lights on the faces, I would bring in bounces, like I'd bring a day blue bounce and bounce into that, so I'd have a softer, bluer, but a fill light without having any kind of double shadows and things like that. Although the dinos, as you see, are not the sharpest shadow in the world. It's a large multi-head fixture, so it tends to create a soft shadow. So the effect always to me looked like late afternoon on a hazy, overcast day where you have a not completely sharp sunlight. So there's a close-up of Amanda Seyfried where, again, she's just lit by the dino, and all I lit her face was just some day blue bounce card right next to her. Again, it's trying to do less is more kind of thing. This is another scene in the backyard set. Again, the space lights are just doing the fill. It's a longer lens shot from one room looking across the backyard to the other house. And this is a case where I put half O on the backlight to make it feel more late afternoon, so you'd have a color temperature difference, again, that you would have in real life. Again, the longer lens, I think, helped a lot to make it feel a little more believable, as if you're outside. But it's really the contrast difference. I'd just really make the backlights as hot as possible, because there's nothing looks faker than me than a backlight that's supposedly the sun, that's just, just normal brightness. But it still bugged me that I never could get a high noon effect in that stage, because there's no way to rig anything directly overhead. So for a few episodes, I got them to give me a articulating condor that I would drive into the backyard and arm a 20K right over people to try to get a noon effect. But they kept complaining to me about the cost of that, and the crew having to drive this lift around. It was not easy to do, but I did get some nice effects when I had it. We had some scenes. This house has an open roof of slats, and I wanted that pattern of a high noon light creating a pattern on the wall. And so I finally got a scene like this is with Jean Triplehorn, where I had the 20K right over the top of that trellis to create this pattern all over. Of course, then I had to flag it off her like I would in real life, because I wouldn't want to see her directly under a high noon harsh kind of sunlight, because it's not complementary. So I diffused it and filled from low and all that stuff I would do in a real backyard set. But I had that nice pattern on the walls, which is just something I just didn't see from the earlier seasons. So the other thing that happened on Big Love, besides learning to light an exterior scene inside was that it was the first time in my career I'd ever worked with another DP. I taught myself cinematography basically by reading books and reading American cinematographer, then shooting my own short films for a long time, and then shooting for other people in film school. But it's finally in 2006, after working for a decade, that we had a co-DP system on Big Love where we alternated episodes. And but what happened was on that season, the other cinematographer fell ill in the first episode, and I had to take over the first half of the season by myself. But then finally they hired a new cinematographer, Bill Wages, to come in the second half of season 2. And it was the first time I really could watch another cinematographer not only work, but light exactly the same sets and the same actors and very similar scenes constantly over and over and over again. It was like another film school experience for me. And Bill came out of documentaries, and he's from Atlanta, Georgia. And from documentaries, he learned to work a lot with bounce lighting and low-cost kind of lighting solutions. And he did such beautiful work just bouncing off bed sheets and off of white furniture and using mostly Source 4s, which we brought one in, which is a Lico light, to control where he bounced on the set. So he used almost exclusively bounce lighting. And I would walk onto the same set that I was lighting, and there would be staples everywhere because he's stapled in, show cards all over the set. There'd be pieces of white card just left over everywhere. So it drove the art director crazy. She'd have to bring in the set painter to come in and touch up all the, little holes and things. But to me, that's the whole reason you're on a stage, is that you can do that. If you're on location, you have to be a little kinder to the sets. But I learned a lot about bounce lighting from Bill. On very large bounces, he would use big bed sheets, and he would use often open-face 2Ks and blondes and other things to light. So 2 years after Big Love, the Polish brothers, who I did Twin Falls, Idaho, and North Fork, were doing a small independent film with this big idea that the entire movie would be shot inside. It's an outdoor movie. It's about manure salesmen who go from farm to farm to farm in the 50s. But they wanted it all shot indoors for a kind of stylized Wizard of Oz feeling. They also wanted to control the color palette to the point where everything was painted brown to match the theme of the story. And so not only was the landscape brown, but the sky backing was brown too, which created a problem for me because it's actually this brown sky and the brown ground were actually the same luminance value. And I had a hard time making them look like a sky versus the ground. And also the problem was trying to light this giant stage they had built on an independent film budget. So this is the stage under construction. You see 270 degrees of this sky painting, which is painted beige, with a wooden ramp with dirt on it that went right up to the bottom of the painting. So there's no gap between the two. It's just dirt hitting sky. It's supposed to be flat Kansas, basically. And then we had these crop rows, and then out on the edges, we'd put smaller and smaller rows and smaller objects. Like we even had a little toy train set running along the top of the wall there. But the problem I kept running into was how to light this set. I was shooting Jennifer's Body up in Vancouver when they were starting pre-production, and I only had 3 weeks of prep before I started shooting this. So my crew had to start prepping this set before I arrived. And I kept saying, well, it's 300 by 200 feet long. I'm going to need, I counted something like 150 space lights to just start with the base soft skylight effect. And then I'm going to need probably a hard light on every corner and 2 or 3 in the center to get the hard sunlight effect. And the producer said there's no money for that. And I said, well, you can't build a 300 by 200 foot length set and then tell me there's no money to light it. What do you expect me to light 1/3 of it? It's just, I have to light all of it. For daylight. It has to be lit from end to end. I just can't light just a corner of it. So I said, well, and the other problem with the 150 space lights was the rigging time, because we were shooting in 3 weeks, and they said, well, it's going to take a rigging crew 2 weeks just to hang all those lights and power them. So I said, well, I kept submitting different ideas, and finally what we settled on is strangely affordable, was I had Kino blanket lights, which are 6x6 fluorescent boxes. and then I had balloon lights, which would seem unaffordable, except they made a flat deal with a balloon light company to provide like 5 or 6 of these for the whole show. And since they were hard mounted to the ceiling, they didn't even have helium. I think they were just filled with air, which saved them money since they didn't have to be moved around much. But once we went away from space lights, it suddenly became possible for me to consider lighting this whole stage with HMI, or daylight balanced lighting. And the reason I wanted to do that is partly because this is one of the early films shot on the Red 1 camera. And the Red camera, as people remember, was particularly noisy in 3200 Kelvin compared to 5600 Kelvin. But also, I feel that faking daylight under daylight lighting just feels more natural than to do it under tungsten lighting. It just, somehow your body or your eye just feels like it feels correct to be under all that daylight. So the Kino idea with the daylight tubes was a great thing for me. The other thing was, it turned out in our story we had to have a scene where stuntmen descend from the sky on ropes as if they're parachuting down to the ground. So at one point I had like 10 stuntmen up in the rafters leaping on descender cables with parachutes with big Ritter fans at the ground blowing up at them to get their parachutes to inflate, so that when it came down in the frame, the parachute looked like it really had fallen from the sky. So I'm like, had 2 or 3 Ritter fans pointing straight up at the ceiling, and all these lights are getting hit with like, 60-mile-an-hour winds basically. And they didn't move at all because they were just mounted hard to that grid. But I thought, oh, if I had gone with space lights, it would have been a disaster, because I would have had, it'd been like 1,000 China balls on strings, just, So it worked out great to go with the daylight. And once we went with the daylight lighting, what I did was I hung an 18K HMI for my hard sunlight effect, which I could gel for like 1/4 O or 1/2 O for a warmth. But when I wanted late afternoon, I also had these 12-light tungsten lights. They had some spot and medium HPL globes. HPLs are the globes that are inside source 4s. So they're a little more energy efficient. They're brighter than a standard power bulb. So I can alternate from a full orange effect, essentially, versus a daylight or partial daylight color. And the balloons, too, were both had tungsten and HMI bulbs in them. So I had the option of switching the bulbs in the balloons to tungsten if I wanted to warm them up. So here's a photo. This is during our testing phase, a photo with one balloon and what I think I had half the number of space blanket lights up at this point. But I did a shot here where I turned on just the tungsten bulb in the balloons, and you can see how it turned the sky backing from brown to orange. So I knew I could create a kind of pseudo sunset effect just by switching to tungsten in the balloons. So here's my first test on that set. You can see one issue is all the characters all drive cars, and the cars reflect every space light, every Kino flow basically, which is something I never could quite. I wanted originally then to fly across the entire ceiling like 60 by silks, to blend all those squares into one solid sky. But again, the producers balked at the costs and the crew and the rigging of all that. But that would have been a great, because I actually didn't need as much light as I got from the blanket lights. I generally had them at low output because I was trying to, again, like with Big Love, get the bright sunlight to be much hotter than the soft skylight. But occasionally we'd dull spray the car, or I've actually did shots where if it's a tighter shot, either fly a silk on a frame over them. Sometimes when they were sitting in the car and you're supposed to see the sky, the brown sky reflected, I had art department paint a giant 12 by 12 canvas of that same sky and put it on a frame and reflect it on the glass over the actors. The only problem with that is it would also cut all the daylight from overhead, because it wasn't a silk, it was a solid painting, so then I had to relight them. Here's another, this is a photo of the stage in full production. It's a scene where this car pulls up to this farmhouse. We had one landscape set, and we had to put different farms on it. So essentially, to do the movie, we had to take over 2 sound stages. One had all our sort of swing sets, like motel rooms and diners, and the other one had the landscape set. And we'd basically have to flip back and forth. One day on one set and the next day on the next set, so the art department could essentially change over this entire set within one day into a whole new set. So this house comes and goes, it becomes a cornfield, and it becomes a carrot field, and it becomes a potato, you know, it just on and on and on. But here you can see I have the tungsten lights on for a kind of warm late afternoon light on the house with the cooler top light. And because I had kinos overhead, I'd often use kinos for fill light too, daylight kinos. But you see I have full O on some of my HMIs when I'm trying to create the same thing that the tungsten lights are doing up high. So this is a shot from the first day of the movie after my tests. And the art department had made a receding vanishing line with crop lines and then put little toy houses all along the top of the wooden ramp. This wooden ramp is only 15 feet behind the actors, you know, so trying to create something like an endless landscape. But as the more and more, and I've lit them with the tungsten backlight to create a late afternoon effect. But you see the coolness of the kino flows all over the crops as if it's skylight. Now, the point of the movie to shoot it all inside wasn't to make it completely photoreal. I was trying to make it as real as I could, knowing that it would be stylized. Just as you can tell, the sky itself is stylized like a Dr. Seuss kind of illumination. But after like a week of filming all these scenes, I got better and better at faking the daylight look. We started adding a little bit of smoke onto the set to create increase the aerial perspective, which helped. We blew fans on anything that would move, any grass or anything that would be drifting in the wind, and the art department got better at faking the vanishing perspective effect. So after the first week, the production designer and I both went to the director and said, can we reshoot the first stuff we shot on day one, because we're so much better now by the end of the first week. So we squeezed in a reshoot of this scene at the beginning of the next week. And so this is from day one, and this is the same scene from day 7. And you see now the difference, and we learned that it was better to do the vanishing lines more straight into the center of the thing. The art department, he got better at breaking up the wooden ramp to look more like it was in the distance. We have a light amount of smoke now that's creating depth. The lighting on the actors is more or less the same. It's the same 12 light tungsten and the kinos overhead. But the main difference that proved all this was that I learned to make the sky overexposed. Unfortunately, it had been painted, so it was very hard to overexpose. It was painted medium brown. So off each side of the frame, I've got an 18K HMI just spotted right onto the sky, and then flags to flag it off the ground, which always meant the ground kind of the sky got brighter about half, you know, a third up the sky, because if I didn't flag it anymore, this would get all overlit. So once I started overexposing the sky, it suddenly felt like it had depth. And one of the side benefits of that was that I've actually, since they painted a brown sky with white clouds, I'm actually having some clipping, digital clipping going on in the brightest highlights. They're clipped on the digital files, which actually, oddly enough, made it feel more real. Like you couldn't contain all the exposure of the landscape anymore. So it's a case where you normally would avoid clipping like the plague. Here, a little bit of clipping is what sells it as being outside more. So, and then I had the same set configured another way. This is not colored for late afternoon. It's more midday color. But the sky, we would, every time we'd move back in the set, the art department would get in ladders and they'd change the clouds a little bit, so they sort of changed through the course of shooting. But what was unique about this scene is I wanted the effect of them looking up at the farmer with the sun behind his head. So the question was how I was going to get the sun to be in the sky. And essentially, this is where I used my 12 by 12 painting of the sky, and I cut a hole in it and I think I put a 5K through the hole, so I could see sky and a light and put the actor against it. So their point of view was this shot, where you've got this 5K just through a hole in a painting, essentially. And so I started playing more and more with putting lights in the shot. This next shot here is here I've got this trailer home. It's almost parked against the sky backing. There's really just 5 feet hitting to the sky. But in the tree here, I hung on this branch a 2K Fresnel, just pointed right into the camera lens, and I put a light diffusion filter on the camera so I wouldn't see the fixture itself, just get a burned out dot. And I find over time now, I've done this a lot, is I generally use a 5K par, or if it's far away, a par can or something. But generally, I want a fixture that when you look straight onto it, all you see is the Fresnel or the lens. So you don't see a unit underneath or two big yolks on the side. You know, there's not many lamps that have that shape. And I almost always end up now with like a 5K par or some sort of unit like that I can look straight into. And as long as it flares the lens, you don't see the yoke and other things. There's another set, again, where there's I think there's a 5K on a stand here, you know, and I think I got rid of the stand by putting a piece of sky painting against the stand and then covering it with bushes so you wouldn't see the stand. But it's pointed right into the lens again. Now this is our we had the swing set I said where we had to go to when we weren't shooting on the farm set, but it also had exterior scenes. It was just a smaller stage. So here I have this little low wall around the parking lot of the hotel, which only has like a 5-foot gap till the painting starts of the sky again. So it's a very small set to try to make it look big. Again, smoking the set worked well. We ran out of Kino blanket lights because there just weren't enough. I think we had 30 or so in our big stage, which was like every Kino blanket light in LA, I think. So when we got into this stage, I used Luma panels, which is another company that makes essentially large box fluorescents. And you can see them reflected again in the car. You know, it's sort of the one problem with not running the silk over everything. It's funny, as I was talking to my gaffer on Jennifer's Body, who had just done X-Men 3, where they had a scene on the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was all lit with, I forgot, he said Kinos, actually. They lit the stage with Kinos, and he said the director suddenly wanted to do a dead overhead shot over the not Brooklyn, but the Golden Gate Bridge of all the cars on the, and he said they got the crane up there, and they looked down, and all they could see was Kino tubes under every car. So they spent thousands of dollars on dulling spray. They went in there and dulled every window of every car. He said it took a day to just spray everything. I'm sure the air was horrible to breathe, but that's how they solved the problem. So it's a constant problem. I tried to do a sunset scene where I essentially just put a 10K, I think, just sitting on a pigeon, on the ground, essentially resting on the ground, pointed right in the camera. And then switch the balloons to the tungsten so the whole sky would go warm. And then I put a little spot on the gravestone from off camera above him. So you can see on his shoulders here, there's actually a light above the frame lighting the ground itself. So this is the one thing I learned from Big Love was just how to tackle these kind of day exteriors. And on this film, Manure, I refined what I'd learned, but it really helped to me to be able to have that color temperature difference between the sky and the sun, and have the sun be able to get very orange, but the sky to stay cool. Because when you get near sunset in real life on a clear day, the sky even gets bluer and bluer. So you have a much stronger difference between the key and fill colors. And it's something very hard to do on a stage with tungsten space lights unless you gel all of them. And it's hard to gel a space light, as anyone's tried. So I'm just going to jump back in time to 2006 when I did Big Love, and I started working with Bill Wages, who brought in a ton of Source 4s into our lighting package. I had already had like 6 or so, but he brought in like 20 because he lights with them so often. So I started using the same sort of approach, and it was very useful. Here's a simple day interior. I wanted the effect of the sun coming across the room, but literally right here is the fireplace wall. There's one window right here that I could light him through, but here there's no window at all. And I didn't want just this to be dark, so I have a Source 4 just sitting right next to the table, like one of these just sitting 3 feet from the table doing this slash with the barn doors of the thing, as if the sun were coming across this table, then coming across here, and then another one in the next window doing here. It's a very fast way, and what's nice about source 4 is it's a ellipsoidal light, so the lens creates a very sharp projected pattern. So it has the feeling of sunlight just because it's so sharp. The downside, though, is that there is some chromatic aberration in the lens. So when you use the doors to create the slash, you'll often see some faint rainbow fringe, and your choice as you're focusing is to either make it a blue fringe or an orange-red fringe. Lately, what I've been doing is taking a little 18 by 24 solid and just flagging that fringe so that I'd have a little, if it was if in a wide shot I wouldn't care, but in a close-up I didn't always like that color fringe. Some other times we'll take a little half Hampshire kind of frost slide, and that often helps get rid of some of that too. So in Jean Triplehorn's close-up, again I have the source 4 slash on her, and you can see a little of the blue fringe from the barn doors there. And then just to create some depth on the next room, I put another source 4 and put a slash on this couch, just so there would be some bright, dark kind of effect. There's a kitchen scene where she's got a little backlight from just off camera on her neck with I think, I might not be a source 4 in this case, it might have been a par outside the window. I often use fire starter pars and other 5K pars to get very hot spots when I'm in a tungsten lit room. But one thing I learned from working with Bill Wage is that often when he backlights an actress in a day interior, he'll have it aimed a little off. It'll like hit her shoulder, part of her ear, part of something else. So it doesn't feel, it feels more real because people don't stop and then stand in the perfect light. The light is coming into the room and the actors move through it. And sometimes they're half in and half out of it. And when I saw him doing that, I thought, wow, that looks so much more natural than to have the backlight over her whole head, to have it just hitting the lower half of her head. So I had that light come through and have it cut as if the window were cutting it. And same with this little scene on this couch. I had a source 4 on the couch, but rather than have it hit her, I just sort of put a slash across part of the corner of the couch, and she's sort of sitting out of that light. So it just feels more like what happened in a real day interior. And then after the film Manure, I did a television series, United States of Terra, for Showtime. And again, here's an example on location of a daylight HMI. Basically, I mean, it's a source 4 with a Joker 800 globe in it. So I have essentially a daylight version of this source 4. I really like those lights for location work because out of a Joker 800, I get the output of like a 1.2K HMI, but I get all the advantages of the source 4 in terms of creating a sharp beam and everything. But they're tricky lights to work with. The conversion to put a Joker 800 in a source 4 has to be done right, or else you don't get the light output. It can fall off too rapidly. It can go out of focus. And I asked ETC why they didn't make an HMI source 4, version of their own. And he says, well, technically, the Joker 800 exceeds the heat limitations of the unit. So essentially, you're putting so much heat behind the back of the unit that to them, it's out of the tolerances that the manufacturer allows. So they sort of tolerate it as an aftermarket conversion, but they wouldn't do one themselves. Now, with LED versions, it's a much more heat controllable and it's more possible. Although, so far, the LED version of this is not as bright as a Joker 800 yet, but I'm sure that it will be soon. Here I had a day interior set where I wanted the camera tracked around and you would see this sun coming right through the window at her, but normally outside this set window, I would take a Fresnel lens out of like a 20K or a 10K to create the hard Venetian blind pattern through the smoke. But in this case, I was looking almost straight out the window, and I would actually, even with a Fresnel, I would see the lower half of the Fresnel sticking out. To come into the room, it'd have to be lower than the window, and I actually would see the fixture. So I was trying to figure out how I would get this effect without seeing the fixture. Instead, I decided I would hang three source 4s just above the window frame. There's one for this little, one for the center, and one for the right, all lined up to create parallel rays. So with much smaller units, it was easier to hide the fixture to camera, so I could track over and almost look right into the sun, but not see the actual fixture outside the window. On location work, I did a movie here in New Jersey about 4 years ago, and this was called Assassination of a High School President, and had Bruce Willis in it as he played the principal, he's not there yet, but we were on this Bayonne High School. It's a giant old high school in Bayonne. And the light was failing, so I knew by the time I actually shot this scene it'd be night, but it's supposed to be daytime. So the only quick way to make it look like daytime was to frost all the windows. So essentially I went outside and I papered, and you can see they've done the first window, but the second two still have daylight outside, but it's not going to last. And then from the ground up, I didn't have a crane that day, so I blew out the windows from below with HMIs. But to light the room, I wanted the soft backlight on the desk. I put a 4x8 beadboard, and I pointed the HMI source 4 into it. You can see I haven't tipped it yet onto the card because I didn't want to blind the rigging grips there. But eventually I would fill this card. And what's great about source 4s is that you can use the shutters, the barn doors, to cut precisely the shape of the card. So I could create a square light source that matched that card, and I wouldn't need flags to then flag it off everything else. Here's a day interior on location. Just as comparison, it's from the movie Astronaut Farmer that I did with the Polish brothers. This sunlight effect is I think it's a 2K xenon. It might be a 4K xenon, but it was on a lift outside. We're on a second floor of a location. But I wanted, again, the sharp pattern coming through the window. This in comparison on Manure, which I did with the Polish brothers. We had a small set. I did have one 1K xenon on my package, but in this small room, I decided to use we're setting up, the director is talking to Billy Bob Thornton there, but in the room, I had two Joker 800 source 4s to create a slash of light that ran through the smoke and through the room. Because the source 4 has such a projected beam, it feels like sunlight. One trick I've done, I saw this old movie, American in Paris, and which was all shot for 3-strip Technicolor, which was only, at the time, like 10 ASA. So huge lighting units to create any sort of effect. But there's a sequence in there during the big ballet number where they go through a flower garden, and they have this beautiful effect of dappled sunlight all over the flowers. And I was trying, how did they do that on such slow film? And I noticed it's just a bunch of projected LECO beams. Essentially, they took a bunch of spotlights and overlapped them, as you would get in real life when the sun came through a tree. You get the holes in the tree create basically a projected pattern of the sun onto the ground. So you get essentially an out-of-focus shape of the sun, and you get these overlapping circles. And I thought, well, if that happens in real life, that I could do something like that with LECOs by using multiple LECOs. As long as the rays are parallel, even though they create multiple shadows, it would look like one beam was being broken up from a great distance through something like a tree branch or something. So I've been on locations where I don't have a big light out a window, but I could take 3 or 4 source 4s all gang together, and as long as, with narrow beams, as long as they all have parallel rays, it looks like one beam going through tree branches or leaves or something like that. So here's a set in the United States of Terra. I'm only showing you this just because I'd stapled full blue gel on the windows to make it look like twilight outside. And this is the problem with stage lighting, where you have space lights out the window. It's very hard to gel. It's easy to gel one light, but often outside these windows there's like 5 space lights, cyc lights lighting the backing, then there's your light coming through the window. So often you have 10 or so lights, and suddenly to say put full blue on 10 lights, it's faster just to put blue on the window at that point. But it's again the problem of trying to create different time of day effects on a stage, and it's important to me to create some variety, so you don't have a TV show where it's just day and night all the time. Although I've been, sometimes they flip the order of scenes, so a scene that I've decided is sunset because it's the last day scene in the script gets flipped, so now it's a midday scene, so sometimes you get thrown off by that. So my most recent feature right before I did Smash was this independent feature called Big Sur, my latest film with the Polish brothers. And this one is going to be premiering at Sundance in January, so it just finished editing. So it's not available to see yet, but because we're shooting on the Epic, it was one of the first Epic camera shows. Even though it's been in editing for 2 years, it's not the first to be released. what's nice about the Epic or the Red cameras in general is that you can easily pull frames and when you download your footage every day, I can have the data guy just say, give me one frame of every setup. And I go home and I have a 4K TIFF file of every setup, a beautiful frame enlargement. It's a great little aspect I find with the Red cameras. So this is like a scene inside a bar. I have I think it's a 1K xenon coming through that one window on the right, and then I think it's a 4K HMI coming through the big window with no lighting in the foreground. We actually didn't have any day bar scenes. In the story, Jack Kerouac is in San Francisco for half the story, getting drunk most of the time. But all the bar scenes were night scenes. But I told the director, I really love the look of these bars in the daytime, but we never have a day scene. He said, well, we'll just create one. We have to have montage elements anyway. So before we did this night scene in this bar, I threw the lights through the window and did this silhouette day shot. And we just made up a shot of him drinking alone as part of an element in the editing. But I just love the way these backlit counters look, and I just wanted to get something like that. It's a very low-budget film, a very small crew and lighting package, and most of the film is day exterior. But the San Francisco section was all interior. This is a second-floor house in San Francisco, and the only lighting is it's daylight through the windows. I took an HMI Source 4 and just bounced it in the ceiling, and that's all the lighting is here. This is a cabin in the woods up in Big Sur, lit with tungsten lights, but this is a trick I learned from reading an article by Stephen Poster, who mentioned the fact that quartz light bulbs actually burn at a higher temperature than fire. So if you can put a quartz light bulb in a fireplace and it won't melt because the quartz is actually having to handle much more heat than the actual flame. So I have in the fire a couple of quartz light bulbs just on like a piece of metal and some aluminum foil hidden around the stone here, dimmed down and flickering to augment the actual fire. But it's a great little trick to know that you can put a quartz bulb in an actual fireplace. And then I would often hide a light bulb behind one of these kerosene lanterns and things like that. Here's a day interior. We found this actual real cabin in the woods we found and just used it for the movie. We didn't build this for the movie. The only problem I had with it is that I wanted to smoke all the interiors, but these windows have no glass in them. So all the smoke would and plus all these slats have holes, and so the smoke would just keep drifting out every hole in that. It was like pouring smoke all the time. So I ended up stapling clear, I think I stapled in3 gel on all the windows to hold the smoke in. So it looked like it had no glass, but actually had ND, but occasionally there was a problem with reflections in it, because then it suddenly looked like you were in a glassed-in room. But I still lost all the smoke. It never stopped moving. It was always leaking out every hole. But this is lit, I think, with the 1K xenon, some small HMIs coming through the two windows, and then the overall ambience, again, was a Source 4 bounced off the ceiling. I just stapled a white bed sheet to the roof of the cabin. And after we wrapped, we had to shoot a dream sequence in LA, where Jack Kerouac has a nightmare involving vulture creatures and strange society things, and very tiny crew. We shot at this abandoned hospital in East LA. Not much lighting was involved, but I have natural daylight coming through the window, and we had this cross that I put a single, I think 1200 watt HMI behind. But to make it feel dreamlike, I flicked water on the lens before every take. I had a fog filter on the lens, and smoke the sets, but I would take a cup of water and I just sprinkle water on the camera right before we'd roll, so that it'd be out of focus water droplets. And on the close-ups, I shot with this little lens baby I had. So this is a close-up of one of our creatures effects with the lens baby in the smoked room. Here's another one. It's hard to walk handheld with a lens baby, trying to play with the focus in the lens while you're actually moving. And this is a wide shot. And again, the only lighting is just some daylight and a bare light bulb with a spot tungsten bulb over him. I maybe show that season 2 trailer for Smash if we have time. the only thing I have from Smash to show you is there's a trailer online for season 2, which we've been shooting. We still have 3 more months to shoot, but it premieres in February, and this network just released a trailer for the 2nd season of Smash. So after I show it to you, I can just talk about some of but the trailer gives you a good idea of what I have to face, which is a combination of big musical numbers and then sort of New York street scenes, New York apartments, New York restaurants, mostly location work, but some stage work. You see on Smash I deal with is a lot of location work, but we also have some permanent sets. A lot of the characters' apartments are sets, offices, Eileen Rand's office. This is all uncolor corrected from dailies and temporary blue screen, green screen stuff, so some of the composites are still being worked on. But when we go out on location, we're shooting on the Alexa camera, and I'm working in pretty low light levels, which has been a great help to me, because we don't alternate DPs on the show, so I have no prep each episode. I show up, we go into a new restaurant, and I've seen it, other than photos, that's the first time I've been there. So even though we do have advanced work, the Best Boys goes in pre-rigs and things, it's often on the day I come in and I have to sort of light these locations very quickly. And it's just been a great boon with these new sensitive cameras that I can turn on, the restaurant lighting and be 80% there, and I just have to light the actors in the foreground or add a few accents here and there. It's so much easier than trying to light from scratch the whole place from head to toe. You'll notice a lot of bar scenes, for example. We put like tubes behind all the bottles to make them glow, and that's again talking about technology. It's pretty low tech. My gaffer has made a bunch of Lenestra tubes, which are tungsten tubes. They look like fluorescent tubes, but they're tungsten. Very low wattage and very warm, but useful to just hide behind bottles on bars and other things, and we do a lot of that. He's also going to make up some strip LEDs in a similar manner. He's just going to take some ribbon lights, create some tiny wooden sticks, essentially, that we can quickly dress behind furniture and other things when we go in these restaurants and bars. There's one scene in a couple shots in this restaurant that has this blue glow along the edge of the set. That is a restaurant set we built for the show. In that case, all the blue strip lighting is a blue LED that's dimmed way down, and then I have tungsten hanging lamps over the room. So we do a lot of tungsten lighting on the show. Often the key lights are big key lights for me are often a 2K Chimera through an 8x light grid as a big soft key. Fill light is often low Rifa lights. I have the small 44s, the 55s, the 66, and to knock them down, we've sewn 3 layers of bobinette together and then clipped them to the top of the light, and I just flip layers of net over the Rifa until I knock it down to where I want. They're all on dimmers too, and I dim them, so it's a combination of dimming and scrimming that gets the levels that look nice. In terms of the modern lights, generally my attitude is that I will mix types of light sources if it's a back or a fill light, because I don't think it matters too much if I go from one person backlit with a tungsten to another person backlit by a Kino and another person backlit by an LED, or with fill light. But when it's key lights, if it's in one room that's a certain environment, I try not to have an actor in 2 different types of key lights. So if I decide everyone's going to be keyed tungsten, then everyone's going to be keyed tungsten. Or keyed with a Kino flow, then everyone's going to be keyed with a Kino flow. I just feel like I just don't want to deal in color timing with a face walking from one type of unit into another type of unit. Even though I can get it close, it's just enough of a subtle difference that it can be too time consuming to color time in the short schedules we have. So I mostly use tungsten on the stages. Now for day interior work on location, I actually don't mind mixing HMIs with LEDs with gelled tungsten, because in that case I find daylight situations have so much more variety in color temperatures and mixed effects that you can get away with it. Also, the daylight sources are a lot more consistent to each other. It's always trying to match a tungsten light bulb that seems to be the tricky part for manufacturers. Matching daylight is all over the map in real life. So, as long as they match each other, they work pretty well. And So I've used, I find the light panels one by ones very useful on location. When we do Steadicam stuff up and down the streets of New York, you know, sometimes I've done fill light with a 4-bank Kino flow, which is lightweight to handhold, but then I've got to run an extension cord up the whole length of the block, and lately I've just been using the light panel, the 4 1x1s, which can take an ordinary camera battery on the back of them. So that, you know, and I've hidden light panels around sets, even, you know, tungsten lit sets as an eye light when an actor has to. I had a scene the other night in a very small set where the only place to get a fill light in that wasn't going to have an actor cross in front of it was to just hide it on a chair. So I just, right here, a chair in the foreground, I put the 1 pi light panel there, and so the other actor in the background had this little glint in his eye from it, and I could knock it down quickly. And so that's, and I have the LED chroma light for my, as an eye light for my camera. And for Steadicam stuff, and I often use the micro panel LED light, which is so lightweight that the Steadicam guy doesn't complain, you know, about it. Most of the other lights the Steadicam people find throw off the balance of their rig, so it has to be a fairly lightweight unit if you're going to stick it on the nose of the lens. And I find that the micro panel is the perfect light for that kind of work. We have, otherwise our lighting package is a lot of source 4s and a lot of just regular tungstens. I do a lot of lights with chimeras, again, just a fast way to create soft light, or a lot of bounces off bed sheets and muslin. We have something that my key grips taught me is that if you're inside, you don't have to take the time to put an 8x on a frame. You can just hang it off a pipe like a curtain. We call it T-boning. So we have like a stand with a piece of speed rail, and we just clip the 8x muzz or the 8x light grid to it, and I just run it around and put it where I need it quickly, and, or raise it up. If I have to get it well up in the air, it's easier to do that with a bounce than to get a light up in the air. So I'll take an 8x muslin and just run it real high up and bounce into it. That's about it. I mean, I was going to leave some time for questions because that's something I could answer any questions you guys had.
Actually, to follow up on what you were just describing, the trailer you just showed, this shot of the blonde girl coming out of the theater, then that was probably lit with a LED off to the camera right? Or what was the lighting on that? I think when she exits the theater and starts to go down the street? I'm not sure which shot you were talking about. The blonde girl's walking down the street in one scene at daytime with a Steadicam. Yeah, the nighttime when she said she's exiting the theater at night. It's a real short clip. I just was trying to picture where that light was in that shot. That was to follow up. I thought it was. I was wondering that was that LED there just to give a little bit of extra light on her as she came out under the. I couldn't quite make out which theater it was in the city. Yeah.
I don't remember that shot in there, but I probably outside at night it was just, we use a lot of bounces off cards and LEDs for eye light. Most of the LEDs are just fill light because I only have the small 1x1, so I generally don't key through them unless I have enough output to put them through a full frame of diffusion. But the truth is, a lot of the New York stuff around Times Square, I don't light at all. I mean, I had a big sequence, 360-degree track, 2 girls in the center of Times Square singing last season, and it's all available light. And not only it's available light, but there's so much light in Times Square that I had an in-3 filter, 500 ASA, and I was at an f4. I mean, it's like daylight levels out there. So producers almost get spoiled because you stop asking for equipment. You go, okay, I'll just take a few tiny lights and some LEDs, and I'll be lit. After that, I had a night exterior way up in Nyack in a parking lot outside a high school, which had no parking lot lighting. And I'm saying, well, I'm going to need a lift on that corner with a 10K on it. I'm going to need a lift on the opposite side. And they go, what do you need lifts for? And I go, it's pitch black out here. We're in the middle of the country. There's no lighting out here. They had gotten so used to the street stuff where we like doing it with just 1Ks and tiny lights with the camera. Usually I crank the camera to 1000 ASA, and sometimes I'll open the shutter to 240, and I generally can shoot at almost any light level. And if I bump it up to 1250 or ASA or something, I'm starting to shoot in levels that are lower to your eye than they look on the monitor, which is an interesting phenomenon where you go back on the set and it's like nothing. I had a party scene in a loft that looked over the Empire State Building, and for the cityscape to read as brightly as possible, I used a Primo prime lens wide open at f2. I cranked the camera to like 1000 ASA with 240 shutter, and the light levels were incredibly low to your eye. You walk back on the set, and the actresses are looking into like, you know, a Reefa 44 with 6 layers of net over it, dimmed down to 50%. So you're just looking at a dim glow, but you go to the monitor and they're fully exposed. It's actually led to a little bit of a problem where the actresses are used to having so much light on them that they worry that they're not being lit. They actually say like, I need some light here. And I go, you got a full exposure key light. It's just, you know, they're staring into this dim thing, but on the monitor it's a very bright source. So their comfort level is suddenly they feel like, why am I not being lit anymore? It's just, you know, it's just having to get used to the new light levels that are on set. It's just, you know, they're just used to staring into a 1K or something through you know, something bright, and it's just, nowadays we just can work so much less illumination. The problem also starts to become the opposite, where any stray light, it comes in and creates an effect on their faces. When I shoot out in the streets here, I spend more time turning off street lamps or flagging them than I do lighting the actual street. You know, the street itself, I'll have a little backlight and a little dim bounce, but then I'm telling, okay, that street lamp a block away, I'm getting a camera shadow. And that street light over there, there's a boom shadow from that one. And that street, either I'm trying to turn them off by triggering the sensors. We'll take a PAR can and just spot it into the sensor, and hopefully that'll turn off the street light. Or we'll have to take you know, Mambo stands and floppies and raise them way in the air. So I've got 3 or 4 floppies just way up in the air trying to flag off street lights. But you wouldn't think a block away a street light would do anything. But at these ASA levels now, you know, it's throwing all these faint little shadows. You know, in a close-up you can see it. So it's an interesting new problem, but it's made it a lot easier to shoot.
So I noticed in a lot of the work that you did, you like to create atmosphere and those shafts of light. So for some of us that have a very limited budget, no xenons, what have you done to create those shafts of light?
Well, to see the light, you have to haze the set. That's just a given. And you know, there's different smoke machines. Some are better than others. It's all, you know, it's all the art of evenly distributing the haze is the big problem. You have to take all the drafts out of the room. You have to close all the doors. You have to get it to fill. You can't smoke, even if you're only shooting the left corner of a room, you can't just smoke the left corner of the room. The entire room has to be hazed just to shoot the left corner, because smoke will always move to where there is no smoke. So you have to fill a space evenly for starters. But after that, the cheapest way to get a shaft is these smaller projector lights, like the Source 4 I showed you in the photo. And even on a smaller scale, like a dado light with the projector lens on it will create a fairly, you know, straight beam of light. But then it's not going to have the size and spread of a bigger light. So that's always the downside. At some point, if you want to fill a whole window with one big shaft of light, you need a large unit just to get the spread. That's why I was saying that you can clump together multiple Source 4s and create a broken up kind of effect of one beam of light. You can get away with it. The shadow pattern is not clean, but it can feel like sunlight because the rays are straight. I've seen that in some of Storaro's films. He'll light with what he calls jumbos, which are aircraft landing lights, similar to a Dino, way outside the window with spot globes. So the light is more or less creates a straight beam of light because it's so far away and it's so bright. But if you look at the shadow patterns from the window mullions or people moving around, you'll see 6 little shadows, let's say, instead of one single shadow. But it feels like sunlight. And in real life, the sun can be diffracted through objects, so it's not necessarily unrealistic. But anything that creates a projectable beam, a sharp beam, can do a nice job of creating an effect in smoke. The other problem is the intensity. You know, if you're doing a moonlit scene, you could take, you know, a Fresnel lens out of a 200-watt light and create a sharp beam and gel it blue, and it's dim, but it creates a nice moonlight effect. But if you have to do that with sunlight, it has to be bright and overexposed to feel like sunlight.
It's a little easier on a stage in the sense that you can say your base level illumination, you know, if you're working at 1000 ASA, let's say, you don't need that much light level to create an overexposed effect. But if you're on location, you have real daylight outside your windows, it's very hard to then create a strong beam of light that feels like sunlight, because then it has to be quite bright to balance with the view out the windows.
I just had a question about the use of the light panels outside for street work. Do you, in order to soften the multiple little sources, what do you just put like a little piece of diffusion in front?
Yeah, the 1x panel has a frosted acrylic sleeve. Yeah, that's enough to get rid of any kind of specular highlights out of them. I don't know if anyone makes a kind of chimera type unit for those or not, to get a bigger spread or not. Yeah, that's why I mainly use it as an eye light, just to get the shadows. And I find the problem in the streets of New York is that it's not only, it's nice as a soft light, but it's very toppy soft light because you got the narrow canyons of the street. So there's only a slice of sky over the actors. So it looks soft, but it's not always attractive because it's very overhead. So you'll get this very baggy-eyed look if you're not careful. And I find sometimes in close-ups, what I'll do is I'll just fly a 2x3 flag right over their head, so the bit of skylight that's right over them is flagged out, and they're getting lit by skylight from farther away, so it's coming at a more attractive angle. And then I'll just fill from low with a card or something. Often we'll walk with a beadboard or something like that for fill.
Additional questions? Well, thank you, David. David, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. David gives his time on the internet and in various forums and other places, and it's great to have shared some of that knowledge here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.